So the question is, we always tout all the advantages of higher ed, academia, just the fact that we get to choose what we want to work on and things like that. There's a lot of freedoms, but again, there's also a lot of challenges. You faced a lot of those challenges as well. I get the sense that the resilience that you picked up, growing up, like you did, like I did, kind of builds up some of that ability to be able to overcome some of those obstacles. So I'm just kind of wondering how you felt about that.
No, absolutely. I mean, obstacles that sometimes it's just someone telling you cannot do this or you're not going to be good. One example, for example, I wanted to be an engineer, right? That's why I wanted to go to MIT, right, to be an engineer. And after I had a physics class for engineers, and I got a C, right? And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not good enough. And letting my physics professor, his belief that because I was Mexican, I was not good enough, right? Get into my head was a big mistake, right? After that, I told myself, I'm never going to do that. So many times when, in challenges, like there's many times when people will say, well, you're not going to do the job, or this is not for you, right? My attitude is, well, I need to try it, right? I need to try, and the worst that could happen, I will fail. But one of the things that I think I have never failed in my life, I have never failed because even when things have not gone as expected, I've learned. And I always do my best, I don't just quit. I'm not a quitter. So that's one of the biggest things that I think growing up, where I grew up, allowed me to learn is not to quit. Even if I'm coming down, I'm going to come down with a fight, right? It's not going to be because I'm not going to quit. And I tell that to even my kids. I tell them, my kid wrestles, and I said, when one of his matches where he lost, I told him that was such a shame. And he said, what do you mean, Mom? I was losing. But you lose with dignity. You fight to the end. People came here to support you or to support the other wrestler, and the other ones that came here came to see a good match. You give them a good match to the end, right? So even if you're already losing, you're not just going to walk away. The same thing with your journey. Just because it seems like it's going bad, you're not going to walk away. And I think that's very important, because if you keep on trying, you see at some point things turn around, and you actually didn't lose. You actually end up doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I love that comment about doing it with dignity. I mean, no matter whether you're winning or losing, still do it with dignity. Let me move on to your early college career. So you went then from East LA to Wellesley. I'm guessing that was a bit of a shock. Tell us a little bit about your experiences at, when you got there and how they treated you, and then how did you react to that?
So Wellesley, like I said, is a very affluent place, right? It was there where I realized how poor I was. I knew we were poor. I didn't realize how poor I was until I walked in there, and I realized, wow, we were very poor. And even doing my income taxes, I remember doing them, and I had done at that point $10,000 a year, right? And my parents were doing less than that. And that's when I said, wow, And so I realized how poor I was, but also I realized that many times you're not accepted, not because of who you are, because they haven't given you the opportunity to get to know you, just because they assume certain things about you. They have certain kind of stereotypes of who you are. Or they believe that you got in because it was to fill in a quota, as opposed to, no, you really are a good student, right? So many times either the nurse would tell me that her daughter didn't get into Wellesley because I took her spot, and that she would be smarter than me and do better than me. And then, like I said, with my physics professor, my physics partner didn't want to work with me when she found out I was Mexican. And so I went and I went to talk to the professor to ask for another physics partner, and he said, I don't blame her. I would have done the same. I don't know why we keep accepting people like you. When you're not ready, you don't know the stuff, you're not going to succeed. So you figure out how you're going to do it. So he pretty much didn't assign me another physics person. So I got all my Latina friends, most of them were in Latin American studies or Spanish majors, and asked them if they could come and help me with experiments. And they did initially, but later on because we would do it in midnight when no one was in the lab. So sometimes I was there by myself trying to estimate things, do an experiment and estimate. So my experience was not good, but I did have some very good mentors, right? That reminded me that I use those experiences to do the best I can, right? That to really try as hard as I could. And even getting into school, when I was applying for a graduate school, the professors I admire, one of them, she said, well, I don't think you're even qualified for a master's. And I remember I got an A with her in 3 classes. And she said, yes, you got an A, you did good in those classes, but I don't think you don't have the mathematical ability.
Wow.
And later on, I got invited to give a talk, right? And I reminded the students that were there that sometimes some professors might not realize your talent because maybe, yeah, you're doing good in that class. That might not be really your talent in that particular area.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's amazing. So you did succeed. You got your PhD. You got a position at Loyola Marymount and then at Arizona State. Tell us about your kind of early years as a professor. You know, you're transitioning now from a student to now a professor. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that transition was quite difficult. And I say quite difficult. I came back to Los Angeles. Like I said, Los Angeles is my home, right? But I did not realize that even when you're in Los Angeles, in many universities, the population of the community does not reflect the population of the school. And that means not just in, I'm not talking about ethnicity, I'm talking about social class as well, and economics, right? So I had a lot of students that were not as embracing, in the sense that they would be very rude, very, even use profanity sometimes to speak to me. Like I remember students when they would be taking a quiz or a test and I say, okay, time's up, and I'm asking for the exam. And sometimes one student would get up and say, hey, we pay your salary, so I am not gonna give you my quiz if I don't want to. Or sometimes when I would tell them, if you guys come late, I'm gonna close the door again because you're disturbing the class, because they would come like 15 minutes late, and they would remind me that they pay my salary. And then I had students that, I would ask the question. I always like to have students participate. So I tell students to early on get comfortable if they don't like me asking questions, because I'm going to ask questions. And I go, in the way you turn it around, you ask me questions, so you don't give me the opportunity to ask you a question. But when I would ask questions, a student would say, I'm not going to answer your question because I don't even understand you. You know, you're not even from this place. Why don't you go back to Mexico? Why do we? So, and I remember, and the comments like that, my evaluations, I remember being so afraid to open them, because every time I would be reading them, I would start to cry, you know, because it was just so many comments that had nothing to do with my teaching, had to do with who I was, right? And I remember taking them to my chair, and her advice at that point, I had two different chairs that had similar kind of responses, but her advice was, well, you know, you need to start not wearing heels, you look too youthful, too young. You need to wear black suits, blue or dark navy blue, no heels, no makeup. And I think that would change their evaluations. That would change their interaction, and they'll be so friendly with them. But even then, so it's funny, this same chair that gave me that advice, when I cut students teaching, she came and talked to me and said, well, you know, they're great donors, and the president and the sister blah, because we are in a Jesuit school, would like you to pass them. And I just passed them, but give them an A. And I remember not wanting to, and at some point I said, well, what happens if I refuse? Well, what happens if you end up with no job? Okay. And I remember there were things that I felt like it was not within me to do, right? But because there's politics, that's another thing, there's politics and things will happen behind closed doors. So it was very difficult, right? And during those times, I remember hating myself because I wanted to be what they wanted. I wanted to speak without an accent. I wanted to be lighter, right? And but a student actually reminded me. A student said she took my class because she had never had a math professor. And she said, and you know, Dr. Camacho, when they sit there and insult you, I feel like they're insulting me. And if you don't say something, I am going to walk away. And I remember at that point, that's when I started to change, started to say, no, I don't care if you pay my salary. This is my class, and this is my time. So I started to kind of push back. But it's hard to push back against an entire system.
It is. It is.
Sometimes it's best to go to other places that are ready for you. I don't think Loyola Marymount was ready for me. I hope that now, and I think now it's ready for people like me, but it was not ready for me at that point.
Yeah. You have to choose your battles a lot of times and decide what's
Right.
worth it, right? Yeah. I want to move on to your time at NSF, because you and I worked there at the same time, and you were part of the HSI, the Hispanic Serving Institutes program. Tell us a little bit about what the program is, because I'm not sure everybody's familiar with that. And then just give us a sense of sort of what some of your accomplishments were on that.
No, absolutely. I remember seeing you in the building. It was right before COVID, right?
Yep.
And it was a building that was crowded. There were a lot of people. It was a lot of energy. And I say it was a lot of energy because then COVID changed a lot, right? But yes, so the Hispanic Serving Institution program is a program that was mandated by Congress to really close the education gap in Hispanic serving institutions known as HSIs, right? And what gives the designation of an HSI are two characteristics that, by its definition, is really intersectional. It has to be, they have to have 50% or more Hispanic students or Latinx students, and 50% or more that are in financial aid. So it's that intersection. So just by itself is really intersectional, that program. And it's really to incentivize institutions to really change the culture and also the way they do education, to do it more relevant to the students, right? So that they're able to meet the expectations. And so that's what the program is. And when I got there, I remember there were a few people from our community, mathematicians, and non-mathematicians, more like people that were running educational programs, right? They put me to the side and they say, you're from our community, and this program is not doing service to our community. So I remember it, and they said, you have to change it. And I felt like, yes, that's what I have to do, but I have to educate myself. So I did a lot of learning on what are the different methods, what are the different strategies in education and in sociology. What defines as servingness? What does it mean to be served, to do servingness and thriving, to really serve the students, not just enroll them. Also, so I looked at the work of Anne-Marie Nunez, Gina Garcia, Vanessa Sanson, who defines servingness, but also what are the topology, what are the different institutions of HSIs? Because we're very different, yet we're very unique, so that I could know what their needs are. And also, in terms of intersectionality, looking at race, but race from a different lens, like street race. What would people say if they see you walking down the street? Because if they see my sisters are blue eyes, green eyes, blonde. No, I'm a fake blonde, not because of the gray hair, but trying to cover it and camouflage it. But if they see us both, it's a very different reaction, right? And that impacts not just the reaction, but strategies that people put in place that might benefit one work group versus another. So looking into all that and then trying to now create a program that speaks to every single HSI, that speaks to their unique characteristics, but also their needs. And also not just to the HSIs, but the population that makes those HSIs, the students and the faculty, right? And to really have a mix of things. So I really revamped the entire program, right? But it really speaks to learning and sitting at the shoulders of the giants that created that theory to apply it. But it was very rewarding now that I'm on the outside when I meet them and they say, our theories have been there for years, but you implement them and utilize them. And you created a program that really speaks to everyone. And then I also, before I left, I helped create the centers and hubs. And it's funny because my boss would say, so are you staying with us or you're leaving? Because he was happy to keep me. And I said, Diane, just let this one go. Once this one gets approved and the announcement goes up, I know it's not coming down. And then, when they made the announcement, I called her and I said, okay, I am ready to go in a week. And I already had the Fulbright, but I was waiting because my idea was if anything goes wrong, I am staying because I'm going to make a change.
Well, I mean, today there's NSF is under an immense amount of pressure, and I think a lot of it just comes from a basic misunderstanding of what the NSF does and what the program officers do. So personally, I want to just thank you for your time there because you had such a great effect and made such great contributions to the community. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that NSF is doing. So, for whoever is out there who is not, doesn't understand, NSF really does have a great impact on the community. Let me move on then to the Fulbright. Tell us a little bit about, this big step, because it's huge to go from mathematics theory to wet labs and, experiments and things like that. So how did you decide to kind of jump off that cliff, if you will? Right,
no, absolutely. So I've been when I got into research on retinitis pigmentosa, right? For a while, it took me a long time to find a collaborator. Many times when you try to contact a collaborator that is a biologist, they're happy to give you your data. They think you're going to do what estheticians do, right? That you're going to sit there and analyze the data, when in reality you want to model it or you want to bring in a new perspective that is different than just analyzing the data. So in looking for collaborators, it was very difficult. But I finally was able to find one in Paris, right, that understood the importance of math and that was willing to consider it. And we started working every time when we would work, he said, you know what, it would be great if you come to the lab, because sometimes you have insights. You say, oh, let's use this for a proxy, let's use that, right? And sometimes actually that works, and that gives insight to some of the research or questions that we're asking. But if you actually get into the lab, I think your models will be more effective, because then you will know we cannot measure that. That can never be measured. But what are the other things that we could instead measure in place of that, or that we could do? And so I remember he kept on insisting on doing that. And even he sent me announcements that were mainly for European people to apply to be able to do like an internship in the institute, right? And that's what got me to think about the Fulbright, right? To start looking into it. And I knew it was going to be almost like a dream come true, right? I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and he said, well, I think you should apply for one that is more teaching oriented. This is research, for one, and then not even in math. And you have no track record in experimental biology, right? I said, right, but I'm doing it to learn, right? Hopefully I could do that. So yes, so I put my heart into it, had my advisor at that point, because he was going to be my host, read it, right? And we submitted, and I remember when I got the announcement, I started to cry, because I was very, very happy, right? Initially, I got the announcement that I was waitlisted, right? And within, I think a week or two, I got the announcement that I actually got it, right? And I was very, very happy, because it was something that I had never done, right? And I remember my host said, "Are you good with your hands?" I said, "Well, I like to sew and I like to paint." So I showed him some of the paintings, right? I go, because I made some small paintings. He said, "Okay, you're going to be good enough." And I realized why, because dissecting the eye, the retina, with the little eyeball, is very difficult. It takes a long time. So I realized why he only cared about if I was good with my hands.
But I think it goes back to what you said in your talk. You really have to be willing to be able to step outside your comfort zone and to try something, because if you don't try, you just don't know whether you will succeed or not, right?
Right.
Let me move on to the role models and mentorship, because this is something that I think you and I have had a lot of conversations about. I was reading your testimonials, and I just love the statement that you made. I'm going to try to quote it here. Great mentors are not just the ones with the big awards, but those who open doors and fight the tough battles to bring about change. So tell us a little bit more. We've heard about Jaime Escalante, who obviously is very famous, but have you had other mentors that you've worked with that have helped you along the way, and what kinds of things have they done?
Absolutely. So sometimes I think having mentors is not just one. You should have a whole spectrum of mentors, because every mentor will give you the best advice coming from their heart, but also coming from their own lived experience. And that might not be aligned with your lived experience. So sometimes it's good to go and ask multiple people and then apply what really fits within you, right? So I've had great mentors. And also role models. So in terms of, there's some that have not directly mentored me, but indirectly. Like one of the greatest role models that I've had has been Lisa Fauci. I remember when I was a graduate student, right, in Cornell, I admire her, right? And I remember one of my committee members, Steven Strogat, saying, well, you should go and apply to do a postdoc with her. I didn't, because I said, she's not going to take me. She's a giant. But when I met her as a person, she's a great person. And just speaking with her and learning from her, right? So it's not like she's necessarily giving me mentoring advice, but just sharing of her life and what she's done and some of her challenges. I've taken that to heart, and I learned from that. Another one has been Reinhard Lavenbacher, who, again, is not a Latino, is not a woman, but he has had certain experience that I can identify with. And it's so funny that even learning about him when he grew up as a child, right, that he didn't have much. And now how he applies math and biology, and how he's a leader in the field. So he's another one. There's been many. I would name him a lot, but I would be doing injustice. But one of the ones that I do want to mention is, because he's no longer with us, Dr. Banks, Tom Banks from NC State, right? I remember talking with him about even diversity and about things, right? And we clicked very well, because for him, what was more important is that he saw the person. He said, whenever you mentor someone, you have to completely look at the person, not look at anything else, not look at where they are, what kind of student, but what kind of person they are. And are they a good person? Are they a hardworking person? And those are the things I think that are very, very important to, when you mentor someone, really consider who your student is or who your mentee is, and then work with their strengths, but also recognize their weaknesses so that you could help them become stronger. I mean, I know I'm having an interview with you, but you've been one of my mentors too, right? There's been a point where I wanted to become a leader, right? And I'm saying, I still do, but I'm putting that on pause, right? Because what I realize, leaders are, to be a great leader, you are going against a system. And sometimes the system is not ready for you. And even though you have these great ideas, this great way of making people grow and doing the best they can, the system will be working against you. And I realized that very quickly while I was at the National Science Foundation, right? You have great people, but you also have the system that is a brick wall that is not going to get broken, right, for certain leaders. And I thought, do I want to, I love a good fight, but there's certain fights that are just are not to be won, right? So I thought, you know what? I need to step back. I need to actually dive in, give myself an opportunity as a scientist, because that's another thing. When you're a leader in academia or in the academic world, you have to prove that you're the best scientist, because otherwise, scientists are not going to take you seriously, right? Professors are not going to take you seriously have you not gone through the professorship path. So I thought I'm going to go step back and give myself another opportunity. But like I said, but I always reach out to different leaders. And I remember even with you, how do you interact with people? How do you have those tough conversations, right? How do you say no? They're coming to ask you something, you know you're already going to say no. And I remember we had a conversation about that.
I remember that one. Yeah, I always think of it as kind of there's role models, there's mentors, and then there's champions. And I think, like you said, you have to have multiple of these and multiple, areas as well. The champions are the really important ones, because they'll be the ones that will actually fight for you in a tough situation. So let me talk a little bit now about your current career status and your philosophy. But before getting to that, one, I do think of you as a leader, so I think you should consider yourself a leader, because in many ways you have shown that leadership and quality. But one of the things that we try to do, I think all of us try to do, is to give back to the community. What's your sense of that? How do you feel about giving back to the community?
I think it's a moral obligation. I mean, no one gets to where they are without the help of people. There's individuals sometimes said, oh, I never had anyone help me. And I tell them, no, you're incorrect. That fellowship that you got, you don't know how many people fought for that fellowship to be in place, or even to create it. So wherever we are, there's a lot of people who did the work. Many behind the scenes, people that you will never meet, right? That did that fight. We were talking about the great work that some of our, that NSF does, the National Science Foundation, that a lot of the great agencies do. And there's individuals doing the fight to create those funding opportunities, right? They would not be there otherwise. And then you also have the people that review. So you have people at multiple levels, right? So absolutely, I think it's a moral obligation, right? And I tell individuals, but don't feel bad. If it's not in you to help the community, that's fine. Just don't take any of the opportunities that are out there, unless you created it yourself. Because whenever you take something, be ready to give it back. There's a price to pay in everything. Nothing comes for free, right? If you want to achieve a goal, there's a price of the hard work. There's a price of stepping out of your comfort zone. But the same token, if you are awarded a fellowship or something, the price that you pay is that you take that fellowship, you do the best you can to show that money was not spent in something that was not worthwhile. So you do your best, but then you also give back. So when you have a chance to do an opportunity to give back, you give back. At every single step, I've given back to my community, right? Because I felt that I was given an opportunity in life, in many different stages. I mean, honestly, I've had an incredible journey, right? And some of it has not been great, but an incredible journey. And it wouldn't have happened had people not helped me, right? Some directly, some indirectly. So it's a moral obligation. And sometimes I even feel like I overpaid already. I do, right? Because I keep on paying, right? But I always tell my students, one is the right thing to do, but we have a moral obligation. And it doesn't matter whether if you started down here or you started up here, right? And if you don't feel like that's something you want to do, fine, that's great. Stop taking any opportunities, right? Because that's what makes things work, that we help each other and that we help the next generation, right? If we start closing the door, there's some professors that believe that, only the best and the most talented should be the ones to go in that field, right? And then we close the door, well, who else is going to be there? Who's going to be paying our salaries? And that's why I tell some of my colleagues, if we do that, if we don't educate the next generation of scientists, even if they seem to not be the most talented at that moment. Because it's like everything, talent doesn't happen, it's not like you would see it all the time. Sometimes it just clicks and then you start to go up and people see it. I said, we're not going to have anyone. So I really, and I hope that all of you do that, give back, because it's kind of like we live, we do we give back, and then we retire, and then the next generation goes on.
Yeah, I always tell all my mentees, pay it forward. Don't pay me back, but pay it forward to the next. Yeah. So before I turn it over to some questions from the audience, I just wanted to ask, do you have any advice that you might give, say, some of the younger folks in the crowd, or maybe a younger version of yourself? What kind of advice would you give?
Well, I have a lot of advice. The first one is, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid to work hard and to make your dreams come true. Honestly, don't be afraid. Don't let someone tell you that you're not good enough. If I could tell you here how many times I was told I was not good enough, we would hear probably for the entire week, right? So in that case, be stubborn. Don't listen to that. But work very, very hard, right? And also look for opportunities. Opportunities are not going to come to you. You got to go and look for them, right? And you have to dare to apply. I applied sometimes to programs that said, this is only for junior faculty. It means young faculty, right? They just started. But I feel like I'm a junior in this sense. So I explain how I think I'm a junior in this perspective. And I've been given the opportunity. So you should also always have to make your case. So you have to know yourself. You also have to know your strengths and your weakness. And it's your weakness that you have to focus on. Another thing, you might, even if you don't like math, right? You have to embrace it. You have to really have a relationship with mathematics, because it's not going to go away. Math is the foundation of everything. Whatever you do, especially now, right? Math is at the heart of things. And I always tell my students, math is like a woman, right? Intimidating. Initially, you don't want to talk to her. Mathematics. You don't want to get close. And then you get close. And guess what? You're starting to realize that, wow, this mathematics is actually something really good. And then you realize how amazing it is, how wonderful. He said, and it's sexy on top of that, right? And then you cannot live without it, right? And yeah, you have your ups and downs, right? It's like a relationship. It's like a woman, right? Sometimes a little stubborn, and you have to spend more time to get to know it and get better at it. And that's math. So it really is, and it's really it's about getting to know more. So really, it's like I tell my daughter, because she says, I don't know if I'm going to do math or science. Oh, that's okay. You're going to go all the way up to differential equations, and you're going to take statistics too, and linear algebra. And then she said, but why? Because that's what you do. That's what you need to know how to do certain computational stuff. And but I'm not going to do computer stuff. You will. Not in this generation, but look at where the world is. You will. So you need to learn at least some basis. So I tell her, embrace it. So what do you have to do? Embrace it. Math is something that you have to embrace, and you have to, unfortunately, math is very unforgiving. You cannot leave math alone for a week or a month and come back to it and think, oh, I'm going to pick up where I left. You have to, math is going to be not appropriate. You're going to have to go back, 2 steps back to go forward. So it's better if you never leave math. That you do it a little bit at a time. And believe me, you're going to love math. When a kid, sometimes people say, were you in Escalante's class, did you love math? No, I like Escalante and my classmates and the way that he was teaching. But math also was very straightforward. There was no ambiguity. It was like very straightforward, 2 was 2. So, and there was it was a universal language, right? It was not something that I needed to really know how to speak it well, to speak it. So I would say one of my advice is take statistics and linear algebra. Do not graduate from college without those 2 courses. The only bad thing is that you're going to need some requirements to take those courses. But otherwise, we're going to be fine.
All right, so let me see if there are any questions from the audience that you might have. Yeah, Joseph.
So, thank you for a wonderful talk. I think it's really fascinating that you're running a wet lab and a computational lab. I think that's so interesting. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic? Like, are you having people in lab coats running down the hall saying, you got to change the model? Or are the modelers asking the lab, how is this structured and to put together the model? Like, what is that dynamic?
Thank you very much. No, so right now, currently, most of the students are experimentalists, right? Because I have to get started with experiments. Experimental work is very unforgiving, right? Like you have to project it way in advance to be able to do it. And once you start, there is not changing it, which is kind of sad. So you really need to think about everything, right? So I'm starting with experimental stuff, but I do have a math person, and that person is during the computational stuff, learning the mathematics behind it, right? The idea is that they would get trained. The students will start in the area that they're comfortable with. And then once let's say experimental scientists, they'll start to do the experiments. And once that's going, they will also start to learn the computational part and be learning from the mathematicians or the students that are mathematicians. And the mathematicians will do the same thing. For example, like the student who's a mathematician is already dissecting ice. And actually she's one of the best ones, right? But so that's one of the things, to be able to bring them. And so it's going to, their learning is going to be a little slower than if they were to go straight into the field that they're comfortable with. And I remember at some point, the student who dissects ice, she said, I don't like to euthanize the mice. That's okay, we'll do it for you. I told her, but you need to do this. And there might be things that you don't like, but at least you know how it's done. So when you talk about it, you know exactly what it took to do it. So no, but they're going to be working together. And especially when it comes to, now we have the experiment running, we're getting results. The mathematical model seems to be working. At least we have tested the limiting cases. Then now we're going to start to change it. So then we really start to integrate them. So in my lab, I didn't show that room, and I should have. The first room is a big room with computers. And that's where you first walk into, and then you walk into the wet bench and where you have all that. But also even some of the equipment that we have, like the one to collect the electroretinographic, the ERGs, that's an equipment that's in the dark room as well. So we have that in there, and students are learning that because we get a lot of data there and being able to then put it together and start to analyze it.
Any other questions? Right there in the middle.
Hi, sorry. What, youth explains about you're making sacrifices throughout your career. How did you navigate through that?
That is
Can you go ahead and repeat the question, please?
Yeah, making sacrifices throughout your career. How do you navigate that, right? Can you speak about that? And it's very difficult, even now, right? I say even now because sometimes something happens at home with my mom, right? And it's very difficult to sometimes make the tough choices, right? For example, my mom got cancer when I was in Paris, right? And I remember wanting to just pack my bags and go because I'm hearing from my siblings how bad she's doing, right? And then, then my husband said, if you go, you will not come back. You will not come back to Paris, right? You will not come back to the Fulbright. Because even if your mom starts to get well, you're probably going to think that you need to be there. So he says, so you cannot go, right? And I remember, and I remember getting into a fight with him and saying, you're unfair. But then I thought about it, and I said, you're right. I will not come back. So it was very hard, for example, to make the sacrifice to not be there when I know my sisters were staying there late, like pretty much being with her during the time when she was getting ready for the surgery. So she had cancer in her throat and tongue, and they cut off 1/3 of her tongue. And then being there while she recuperates, not being able to eat and eating out of a tube, right? And she still eats out of a tube. But I remember even talking to her. I would call her and I would hang up and I'm trying to be positive, right? And I would tell her stories, and even though I'm having a hard time in the lab, right, and with the culture, I'm trying to make grab to the little stories that I have that are positive to share with her, and then hanging up the phone and crying, right? But even now, remember, I told her, Mom, you're gonna get out of it, because she would say that this is it, and I would tell her, no, Mom, it cannot be it. Remember, I'm coming back, and you have to be there, and you're gonna, one time we're gonna come back, and you're gonna come here to Paris, like she wanted to come to Paris, right? but she was not in a condition to come, right? So, but I told her, I will go and see you once a month, right? Once I go back. And I have been doing that, right? And it's a sacrifice, because sometimes I'm so tired, and I have so much things to do, and I have to go and see her. So it's a challenge. And sometimes, like, the sacrifice means not doing what my heart is telling me to do, because I also have to look into the future and what happens if I do that. So my mom now, thankfully, she's good in readmission, she's fine, and she's doing well. But my husband was right. Had I gotten on the plane, I wouldn't have come back to my Fulbright, because my heart wouldn't allow me to do that. So I had to stand there, and it was very tough. And many times there's sacrifices like that, right? Sacrifices where I sometimes said, I want to do this, or even like, I want to have a family, but I know because of what the expectations are, I am not ready, right? And only you will know, right? Only you will know what. But you have to make those choices. Look at what is going to be what you're letting go, right? And is it worth it? And what is at stake, right? So you're going to have always sacrifices, but you just have to be strong and remind yourself what is the end goal, right? What is the end thing to do? Like even when I left my son, right? I remember sometimes I said I want to come back, but I know I was not going to finish my PhD, right? And I always felt guilty. I felt guilty all my life for leaving my son for that time period, right? And he's getting ready to go to college, and I'm packing his bag and everything, right? And then he tells, Mom, can you sit down for a minute? Can we talk for a minute? And I'm just really nervous. And I finally sit down and say, okay, Alan, what do you want to talk about? And then he tells me, Mom, I want to tell you, because I know you do sometimes, you say that. You said that you feel so bad because you left me with Grandma and Dad to finish at Cornell, right? And I want to tell you thank you. Thank you, because of that, I know what it takes, but it gave me a life and opportunities that other kids don't have. So you did the right thing. And I know right now, as you're packing my life in my bag, even you're saying, Alan, if you're not ready for college, you could take a year off, but you're going to work. You're not going to be here for free. I told him that. Right? But I said, but you don't have to go to college, And he said, no. And that meant a lot. That meant a lot to me. And I remember I cried, and he said, no, Mom, you did right. And I know you wanted to go as far as you could. And that's the thing, sometimes you realize there's a decision, you come at a fork. And if you go to left, it will be one thing. If you go right, it will be another thing. You have to look at what is the end goal, right? And be ready to say, my end goal is over here. So even though my heart is telling me to go here, I'm going to go this direction, and I'm going to hope for the best.
All right, so thank you so much. That's a wonderful note to end on. Be strong and figure out what the end goal is. Thank you so much, Dr. Camacho. Beautiful job, beautiful job.
Thank you.